Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin and we chat about life. And today we are chatting about a different take on the Nativity story. And I absolutely love this book. We're chatting with Laurel. She's the author of A Bellwether Christmas. And it's so cute. What an adorable book. I listened to it. So listening to it was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? What's happening? For the longest time, I thought they were actually going to be part of the Nativity story, like they were, but it's a different take on it. It's how it actually the live action came about. So Laurel, before we start into your book, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm a child of God. I'm a mother. I'm a former journalist. I did newspaper editing. I did radio. I did television, and I've helped my husband manage a couple of production companies in recent years. I also have a blog called God and Gardening on Facebook. So, but this is my first novel. So, this is something a novel, something I've wanted to write for a long time.
Yeah, but you had the reason why you wrote this novel, you got to take some of the things that you like researched long ago and incorporate into this novel.
Yes, that's what's so wonderful about this is that this was more than 20 years ago, and I took my little grandmother to Italy. She had never been out of the country, and her whole life had always wanted to go, and really fell in love with the Italian countryside and learned a lot about church history, including the Franciscans, and thought that this was the early 13th century was just a great, I love medieval everything. I love medieval books. And I thought, oh, I'm going to write a book set in this time period. And so I went back and started doing my research. And I mean, I was pulling in original sources and people commenting on what life was like back then and what happened with Francis and all these other people. And I kept trying to write this book and nothing happened. And then, like I said, more than 20 years later, it was Christmas season, and it was shortly after Christmas. And all of a sudden, I got like what I call a download in my brain. It was like God just went boom, and He said, here's a plot. And I wrote it down in about 10 minutes, and I looked at it, and I said, well, this isn't really the kind of novel I was thinking I was going to write. This is more like almost like a kid's novel because it involves animals and things like that. I said, but wow, I've really got to write this. And somehow I managed to do it. It was not easy. Writing a book is not easy. My husband's written many, but having, me write it, it was tough. But I just loved there was a lot of love going into this book from the characters. And the characters, it was interesting because when I looked at it, I said, now, this brings together all the research I've done on this medieval time period and the fact that I understand a little bit about farm animals because I have some and I have had some, especially sheep. And I tell you, sheep are wonderful, and donkeys, and horses. So I said, wow, I'm going to use their characters as the characters in this book because I knew their personalities. I knew some of the pretty amazing things that they had done that I'd actually seen these animals do. And I said, it's going to use both those things that I know a lot about. And when they say, write what you know. So at that point, it was a great marriage of those two things. And then about a year later, I had the manuscript. So I was just thrilled.
Yeah, you said earlier that writing a book is hard. Give us some of the struggles that you had when you were writing this book.
Well, writing a book is tough just in terms of being disciplined and being able to find the time that you have to carve that time out where you're not distracted. You're not, and my husband's kind of a morning person. I'm an evening person. So I would try to kind of do it later in the even, at night. He likes to do his writing early in the morning. So I would tend to do mine, in the afternoon or the evening. I just cut out some hours to do it. But also there are times I remember feeling at times when I'm having to write a scene. I was like, wow, I'm going to have to write a scene, and this is what I kind of want to get across, and it's going to be an emotional scene, for instance, and I'll sit there struggling, and then I'll just say, I would just pray to God. I would just say, God, I love these characters. I'm feeling all this love right now. And that's what it would take. And boom, it would just come out. It would just flow. So, but that's tough sometimes when you get into those positions where you're like, well, this is a scene I have to write, and it's really got to work. And, but it did. And, I had to do a lot of research because, again, I was writing at about the fifth, sixth grade level, which is really funny because a lot of my friends tell me, "Oh, I loved reading your book because it wasn't hard to read." And I'm like, "Well, that was deliberate because fifth, sixth graders should be able to read it without any trouble." Um, so it took a lot more work, and I had to. I'm just the kind of person, having been a reporter, I found the exact location on Google Maps where it takes place. I would Google walk myself there to the different locations of that where I talk about in the book. Um, I already knew a lot about medieval times. I was a science fiction magazine editor at one point, and loved all kinds of fantasy, and just I had read so much of that kind of stuff that I really understood a lot, and then the research. So I was it was interesting, but it all came together.
Yeah, it did come together. And I love the fact that you said that you wrote this book on a fifth and sixth grade level, but your friends enjoyed it as well. Did you ever think when you were writing this book and you knew you wanted your core audience were fifth and sixth graders that adults would enjoy this book as much? Did you even have the forethought that they were going to enjoy it?
I was hoping that would be, I was really writing a book for the whole family because I thought,
Mm-hmm.
at this level, if you read it to a 5 or 6 year old, they would understand it. They might not be able to read it themselves at, 5 or 6 years old. But I also really wanted adults to enjoy it because, the classic books I read as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, I read them again and I still love them. I mean, I can read anything Marguerite Henry wrote again and just love it. It's so um uh or who can't read some of that? Who can't read Charlotte's Web again and not love it? It's so um I really like that, and a lot of people have told me that they really enjoyed it. Mostly I've gotten feedback from adults, a few children, but mostly adults who say, wow, I love this book.
Well, I think it's probably too because children, they love the book, but they're probably telling their friends about it, not telling other people, the adults. Oh, I really love this book. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably the way it happens. And and the ones who are writing reviews and stuff like that are the adults. So that's who I'm hearing from. But I also just I got to throw for the other day. I got a veterinarian who wrote a review and said, "Boy, her animal behavior is spot on."
Oh, wow.
So
That's so awesome.
yeah, that was good. So that was good. Yeah, and then I also really wrote this because my husband and I love Christmas books, Christmas movies. Have a tough time finding good ones of both of those things. I mean, you really got to you got to work hard to find a good
Mhm.
Christmas book or a good Christmas movie. And in fact, when I did the research for this, I started googling, and looking for good Christmas books for that age group, and virtually nothing came up.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's strange, but I really wanted to write a book that was about Christmas
Mhm.
and had themes that were related to Christmas. And there is a lot of, there's a young lamb who learns a lot of things in this book, and one of those things he learns is that love sometimes takes sacrifice,
Mhm.
and it's a gift, and that's Christmas. I mean, we have a gift that we were given, so and it's a gift of love. So I wanted, because I had gone through so many Christmas books that had nothing to do with Christmas. It's like the Christmas wedding and the Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
and things. I was like, I really wanted to write a book that's really about Christmas. And then the fact that I knew this because I have my research, I knew this little known fact, which was that in a few years, this being a few years ago, this 800th anniversary of this event was going to come up. And so I was like, I bet people don't realize that the nativity scenes they see everywhere that their church puts up, but they put in their front yard, that was not always something that people did. That's a tradition that started exactly 800 years ago,
Yep.
this Christmas. And if you read the book, you'll see my kind of fictionalized account of that. But you'll also see in the appendix, I show you what the historical history says about that event. So it's kind of fun because it's and it's a tradition that is a nice one, as opposed to the tradition of maybe going out to bars every night, between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And like I said, I've read a lot of nativity books, but I've never read one where it talks about the first living nativity scene. Like you actually take in and you take, okay, the Saint Francis, he actually comes around and starts talking and he creates a whole live nativity scene, which a lot of churches do now. But I
Yes.
don't think people realize the origin goes back to him.
Yes, and that actually, I mean, it became it was like, if something could be said to go viral back 800 years ago, this went viral,
Earl.
because everyone loved it so much. And just they were just so, you have to realize they were walking up a mountainside by candlelight, and they come to this cave that's lit, with an ox and a donkey, and all of a sudden they're transported back to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem. And that feeling just was so appealing that it just, this whole thing's just spread. And then the first one was Living Nativity, but that's also when people started to make big life-sized nativities out of wood or out of ceramic, or we have a wonderful nativity set that was from Israel, and my husband puts it out and lights it, usually every year, and it's the figures are about 3-4 feet high. So that whole thing also, the Franciscans were kind of, they loved singing. So this was also right about the time when the first Christmas carols, as we know them, were being sung, um, and being developed. Because before that, it was all kind of like there were hymns that had to do with Christmas that you said at Mass at certain, but, and then there were folk songs that tended to be, love songs and things like that. But right around now, you were starting to get folk songs in people's language, not in Latin, but in their, languages that were about Christmas. And so I've actually did a lot of research on that as well. So they, and I included one of those, which was something, a carol called "The Friendly Beasts," which we still sing today. And I found out that its origins were right around that time period. So I stuck that in there. I said, that's great, because if the Franciscans were involved, they'd be singing. They love to sing. So it's kind of a fun night.
Yeah, it is. We need to take a brief commercial break, but when we come back, you have your book there and you're going to read us part of your book, correct?
Oh, that's great.
Here we go.
Hi, my name is Joanna, and I would like to share with you a little bit about Shores of Grace, Shores Philly. It's a ministry located in Philadelphia. The portion of Shores that I volunteer for goes into Kensington, an area greatly impacted by homelessness and addiction. And we go and we take love, food, clothing, snacks, conversation. We believe that it is a way that we can meet people right where they are and show them the love of Jesus. We have seen lives changed in big ways and in small ways, and we have built wonderful relationships with the people in the community. We have big plans, more we'd like to do, and we would appreciate any support, either through prayer or through donation. If you would like to donate, you can go to shoresofgrace.com, and in the menu, click on Donate. We just ask that you put Philly in your donation comments. Thank you.
Are you ready for an exciting venture in the world of do-it-yourself project? Join me on Market.live and get ready to be inspired by the DIY show hosted by yours truly, Melissa from Chats from the Block Cabin. This is your chance to unlock your creativity and bring your imagination to life. Imagine the satisfaction of transforming ordinary objects into something extraordinary. Get ready to learn new skills and discover how easy it can be to create something unique that reflects your own personal style. The DIY show is here to guide you with every step of the way, providing you with tips, tricks, and ideas that will make your project a success. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. Grab your friends, family, or even your furry companions and tune into the DIY show on Market.live on Mondays at noon Eastern Standard Time, or you can catch the replay. Together, let's unleash our inner artist and embark on a journey filled with joy, inspiration, and endless possibilities. Get ready for a show like no other, where creativity knows no bounds. See you there! And we are back chatting with Laurel. She's the author of A Bellwether Christmas, and she's going to read part of her book. So, Laurel, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, just to set this up, they're going to be talking about 4 different characters. There's Bart, and he's the protagonist of the whole book. He's a very curious, clever, but impetuous, impulsive lamb. He's about 6 months old. His best friend is named Ginevra, and she's a really good friend to him. She also can jump higher than he can, so he's kind of a little miffed about that. But and then they talk about Mundo, who is their shepherd boy, who's his 14-year-old shepherd boy. And they talk about Peco, who is the guard dog, the kind of the sheepdog. So this is a scene, and and it's interesting because Bart is, you should see, he's an escape artist, and he was modeled after our sheep, Sir Barton, who was an escape artist. And after this is over, I'll tell you a couple stories about him if you want. But I'm going to read this 2 pages at the end of chapter 3. Hey, what's the matter? Said Ginevra as Bart got up. Nothing's the matter, said Bart. I just feel like going somewhere. Where? Come on, I'll show you. Bart led Ginevra to the weak part of the fence. See this? If we push on it, we're small enough to get through. And then we can go visit places where the good plants grow. They're not far from here. I don't know. Mundo's not around. And exactly. He's busy enjoying himself with all the other villagers. He's not thinking about us. Anyway, we're not going far. We'll be back before he even shows up. And he told Peco not to leave the pasture. Come on. The plants up there are sweet. Well, okay. Bart's guess about the fence turned out to be correct, and they pushed on it enough to create an opening they could wriggle through. The 2 lambs jumped with excitement as they cut across the upper field. While they got to the dense brush line, they trotted along until a gap revealed a path heading upward. Sheep being good climbers, they soon were behind the hill in a glade they both remembered. They began searching for their favorite tasty plants. Though the village was hidden from them, they could hear faintly the sounds of the villagers and a barking dog. Peco must have noticed we're gone, Bart thought. He didn't want Peco's barking to upset Ginevra and make her want to return right away. Let's go up higher just for a few minutes, and then we can go home, said Bart. He backtracked until he found a place where the trail branched off. Soon they reached a grassy hilltop, surrounded by trees and dotted with a few large boulders. Bart trotted right up to the edge of the knoll, and Ginevra followed. Whoa, she said. In front of them was a steep drop. The valley below looked something like the dale the Grange sat upon, only bigger. There was a large stone and brick building they could see in the distance. It had towers rising above the tallest trees. The breeze up here was chilly, but Bart liked how it felt on his face. Isn't this great? He said. It sure is, said Ginevra. I think Lord Giovanni lives in that castle over there, said Bart. The sun was touching the top of the mountains, and Bart knew it would be getting dark in a short while. Well, we should go back now, he said to Ginevra. They turned around and made their way back through the little knoll. The shadows of the trees lying across the grassy area had lengthened. They were nearly to the head of the trail when a trick of the eye, a hint of something wrong, made them halt in their tracks. there was a shadow within a shadow, and it was blocking their way. Then the shadow moved. A shade-colored creature stared at them with yellow eyes. Though Bart had never seen one, his sheep instinct knew this ancient enemy instantly. It was a wolf.
Mm.
And that's the end of chapter 3.
And then people have to read it to find out what happens.
Find out what happens. Yeah.
I love that. So you said you're going to tell us a couple of stories about Sir Barton. So tell us a couple of stories.
Sir Barton was the male sheep that my son got to be the kind of the companion for Lady Guinevere, who was the breeder sheep the breeder ewe that he got at 4-H. So these are both 4-H sheep. And Barton, well, the first story I wanted to tell you is that Barton was such a great escape artist that he at the Ventura County Fair, he actually let all the sheep out of his pen and the pen next to him. So at one point in the middle of the fair, there are sheep running everywhere. Okay, and they saw him do it. So, which is just like, and another time, this was before that happened. This is when we learned that he could pick locks and escape. He got out of his pen, and we lived back then in California, right up against the Santa Monica Mountains. My son, who was about 12 or 13 at the time, at some point had just come home from school, and he looked at the sheep pen and the sheep were gone. And he did not even stop to tell his mother where he was going. He just took off into the Santa Monica Mountains, because Santa Monica Mountains, okay, there's coyotes, there's cougar, and these were lamb. They were still lambs, so they were, only about 30, 35 pounds. So he goes running after them, and in the distance, he gets up to them and he sees them under a tree. And as he starts running towards them, and they see somebody running towards them, and they panic and they start to, as if they're going to run away. And he calls to them. And as soon as they hear him, they stopped. And he goes up to them, and they just turned around and followed him home. And I sat there and went, wow, that's what it means about hearing my voice. My sheep know my voice. I was like, that's why the people in biblical times understood that, because they would know that sheep were like that. So anyway, those are my two stories. But I once saw him do. Let me see. He opened a shed door where the good food was by turning the key, then pushing the handle, then sticking his nose in. He had to do 3 steps to get in, and I watched him do it. So
wow.
He was a clever lamb. And they'd say that sheep are not that smart, but they can be smart. And I think Sir Barton was probably smarter than the horse. I heard about sheep in New Zealand once who were getting into a pasture, and they couldn't figure out how they were getting over to this other pasture and eating this garden, because there was a cattle grate over the between them. And animals with hooves will not walk on a cattle grate because they're afraid their hooves will fall in. So they finally, I think, set up a camera or something, and they watched this little flock would walk up to the cattle grate, lie down, roll over twice, get up, and go eat the plants on the other side, and then come back, roll over again, and get back to their pasture. So who says a sheep is dumb, right?
Yeah, really. I mean, sounds to me like they're pretty smart. They think out of the box. Maybe that's the reason why they say sheep are dumb, because they think out of the box.
Yeah, right, right. And they can easily get into trouble, like us.
I just had to laugh a couple of times, or more than a couple of times, when you talk about the sheep and about Bart in the book, because he's just such a lovable character. What I mean, he's so lovable. He's into everything. He knows he's not supposed to run away, but when he finds a hole, he's going to go through that hole, regardless of whether or not, whatever danger he is. It's almost like it's a childlike quality of, like, you're not introduced to danger until you learn about danger.
Yes, exactly. And he's definitely a bit headstrong that way, but it also propels him to things that he needs to learn. And that's the thing he's really hungry to do, is to learn things. And that, but he really doesn't care about following rules and stuff
Mm-mm.
like that. That's for sure.
So that was based on Sir Barton, your actual shape. But is there a human character that some of the characteristics that came out across with the animals as well? Somebody you know in real life?
Well, definitely my son is a little bit Barton and a little bit Mundo, the shepherd boy. So yeah, there his characteristic, he is one of those all boy boys when he was
Mm.
growing up, and he would just, you know, he had that kind of, you know, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna try that. You know, he was not at all shy about stuff. When he was curious or when he, you know, wanted something, he would just go for it.
Now, you said earlier that you did a lot of research about this book. You had done research before, but as you were writing, you did more research. What was your most surprising thing that you found out when you were writing this book?
Oh, most surprising thing. Oh, wow. That's tough. Uh, I don't know. I was surprised by some of the little the fact that I guess I was surprised by the fact that all this stuff kind of still exists. In other words, the
Mm.
place where this happened exists, the town. Um, I put this little village that I kind of created that was just like a little offshoot of the town, like a which would have happened back then. You know, they would have had, because most people were farmers, so you had to have little villages here and there where the peasants would live. And I found this place right on the other side of the mountain, from Grescio, that's now like an Italian farm bed and breakfast. And I just looked at this thing and I said, "Oh my goodness, this is perfect." So that was kind of a really nice surprise to find that. And I really enjoyed doing that kind of research, because you know, you get to, you say, "Well, I'm going to do something about music or something about their Christmas getting ready for Christmas." I had to learn
Mhm.
all about that, and it was fun.
I love how you made sure that it was time true, because a lot of times when people write novels, they don't write it where it's got the right food or the right drink or the right, and you made an important point to research that and put that in the novel so that you know that they're going to actually, they're reading, not only are they reading historical fiction, but they're actually reading things that are actually, they're learning something about what went on during that time as well.
Yes, and I did that deliberately. I wanted kids to know what was it like living back then, and what did you do for fun, and what did you eat, and things like that. So the foods and everything, you know, like I didn't have them eat, you know, they weren't eating tomatoes. You know, tomatoes are from the New World. You know, they wouldn't have been eating those back then. You know, so I really did try to do that, and make it kind of, especially rural life. And I think even if you know a little bit about medieval, you think, well, just knights and, you know, castles and stuff.
Mhm.
But rural life had its own kind of charms and difficulties. And so you can see that what life might have been like if you were growing up back then. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you went on Google Maps and like researched what, of course you had to use a little bit of your imagination because they're probably modernized a little bit, but were you surprised where how did you take that journey? Because I'd love to know your steps. How did you first of all find where it was actually taking place and then going through and walking in with Google Maps?
Well, I knew from my research that this had taken place in a place called Grescio, Italy. So I went to Google Maps and I looked up Grescio, Italy, and I could see, you know, I knew about where it was. And I'm pretty good also with topo maps, topographic maps. So I also looked up a topographic map of the region so I could see what the mountains looked like, and where the flat areas and the mountains were, and things like that. So that's how I found Grescio, and then I said, well, because of the way the plot was, I'm going to have to be within walking distance of this town, and
Mhm.
particularly within walking distance of this mountainside where the cave will be for Christmas Eve. And I could see where that was, and plus on Google Maps you can see, and there's a museum. Yeah, there's like a museum there. There's a museum of the creche, they call it, museum of the nativity.
Mhm.
um, Museo de Presepio in Italian, and then you can see where the main town was, and the church, the church plaza. And I knew from my research that the church plaza was what was, the castle that was originally there in the 1200, a Norman castle with 6 towers, would have been right where that church was 800 years ago. So and then I Google walked myself from one place to another to see how long does it take me if I walk. And the other thing that was convenient was all these towns are along this road that goes between Rome and further north, like Assisi and Perugia and big towns like that. Well, that road is a Roman road. So that would have been, even though it's paved now, it's probably been moved a little bit because it runs by a river. That road would have been there. So that was very convenient for me, because then I could just walk up and down that road and say, what do you see from here? And I could tell, there's a scene at the beginning where he's looking at the mist come down the valley. Well, I saw pictures that when you're up high enough, that's what you can see on a fall day. You can see the mist on the valley. So, it was really fun to think of exactly where they were when I was writing a scene.
So what did your family think when you wrote this book? What did they think about it?
My mother was kind of like, well, finally, I knew you were going to write a book one day. And they loved it. My husband said he was very proud of me, which is nice because he's a really good writer. And the rest of them are just kind of like, whoa, gee, a book. So it was very nice to have their kind of respect and praise for writing it. And of course they all got a free copy. So
I love that. What did your son think?
It's funny, he read it, the manuscript, and he liked it, and didn't say anything because when he probably recognized himself in a few places. But no, he liked it. But I sent it to him because all these animals that I'm using, those were his animals when he was younger. And so, but he really enjoyed it. And he understands exactly why I made the characters the way I did. And as
I
I
love
said,
that.
and I said, there are other things in the book too, like there's a point that when the lambs are jumping, people don't realize how high sheep can jump, especially when they're young. They can really jump high, and it's important for the story that they can do that. But it's also something I watched them do. So again, that's there were little things like that really made it fun to write.
I also love the fact that you're not only do the animals, not only you're telling the story of the first living nativity, but you're also telling you've got other stories going along in the sidelines, like with the donkeys and with the oxen, and then all these other different animals, and the wolf, and all these other different animals. They all have their own little storyline, and they kind of all, like, in the end up all together.
Those stories come from the legends and the history of Francis. He loved larks, in particular. He used to talk. In fact, he used to say, he even said on Christmas he wished people would feed the birds, and in particular the larks. And he liked larks because he said they looked like little nuns with their brown and white, heads. But he was even known to preach to birds on occasion. And there's a story about him. The story about the hare is also part of the legends or history. Things that have been told about Francis. And the wolf as well. The wolf is one of the most famous because it was considered. He was considered to be just a legend. And then in the late 1800s, they were pulling down this building, this main building in the center of Jubio, and he was called the Wolf of Jubio. And they pulled aside a slab, and there was a skeleton of a large wolf. And, obviously several hundreds of years old. And so the thought was, well, maybe this was a true story about this wolf and how he came to be associated with this little town. Because why would they bury a wolf under their main building? Or I think it was either the church or the main town building. So it was fun to incorporate all those wild animals together with the domestic animals, and that kind of interface was really fun. But that's where all that came from. I kind of, I put it together, but I didn't make it up.
Yeah.
Those are kind of fictionalized accounts of the history.
So people who don't know who Francis is, tell us a little backstory and tell us a little history of Francis.
Okay, so in this time in history, the church was kind of in trouble. There was a lot going on, with scandals with priests. A lot of them had wives and things like that. There was a lot. The popes were very into warfare and a lot of the Crusades and sending this king that way and excommunicating that king, and then they had just started the practice of indulgences, where you were paying for things if you wanted to get out of some penance and stuff. So there was a lot going on that was kind of bringing the church down, so to speak. And into this came the what they call the penitent groups, the Dominicans, and the Franciscans. But in particular, Francis, who he was just one of these charismatic figures, but he was all about poverty and humility, and that's what the penitents were. They were about none of this, wealthy stuff. We're going back to, in other words, like most revivals in the church, they're going back to the early days. Well, what did the early Christians do? They roamed around, from town to town. They had small groups of believers who would pool their money and exist that way. So they pretty much took up that idea, and they would go around and they would meet lepers and they would give them baths and take care of them. And some of them were very wealthy. So they also came from all different backgrounds, which was unusual, because back then you pretty much had to be fairly wealthy to become a nun or a priest, because nun or a monk, because you had to be able to afford to give them your dowry or whatever, so that they would so the church would support you. But in this case, the Franciscans were like, if you want to be a Franciscan, that's fine. If you want to be a friar. So they were peasants and they were knights and they were, nobles and everything in between. But they all gave their money away, put on rough clothing and sometimes sandals, and went around helping others, and in a very cheerful way. They sang. They were, I heard them once described as Boy Scouts, because they loved the outdoors. So they were, but they became a big influence. And Francis is considered to have really helped the church survive, because the influence really made a difference in the following centuries, between the Franciscans and Dominicans, who were also the same in terms of poverty. So that made a big difference. But he was also just such a charismatic figure and had this, love of animals in particular, that and of all creation. He was kind of ahead of his time, in that he saw things differently than the people back then did. Because back then, I mean, an animal was something you owned or you ate, or you was a pest. One of those things was either something good or bad, and people really didn't have that image of them as creatures of God, as much as Francis did. And he saw it that way, as, they're just one of God's creatures. You're another of God's creatures. And so that was quite an eye-opening thing for people. And there are so many wonderful stories about Francis and I just, barely made a dent in them.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your blog. And your blog is called
God and Gardening.
God and Gardening. So let's talk about that.
Well, I've been a gardener since I was 12. I started a little garden in my backyard. My dad helped me dig it up and put a little fence around it. And I've been gardening ever since, one way or another, wherever I've lived, and I've lived in various places. So that's always a challenge, when you live in a cold climate, or
Mhm.
like, the New England, or you live in California, or you live in Texas, or you live in Tennessee, or you live, it's
Yep.
I think I've lived in about five different zones, growing zones. But I realized at some point I was like, there's so many. When I've read the Bible several times, and I've always struck by how many examples there are that just talk, that kind of harken back to our agrarian nature, and all about, there's so many references, like being, the vine and the branches, and
Mhm.
things like that that are always coming up. And I started to see things about gardening that would remind me about things in the Bible. And so I said, you know what, I'm gonna just do a little blog, and it's not even a sermon. It's just like, it's almost like a reflection, or it's just an observation. I'll make an observation, and I'll just write 300 or 400 words about how gardening helps me understand, the Bible better and God better. Um, because there are things, that about the natural world that are just very revealing.
Mhm.
And when you're going through things, sometimes you have to, you say, okay, like, if I'm being so impatient, but when I'm a gardener, I'm not impatient. I mean, I know it takes time for things to grow,
Mhm.
and it's like, so sometimes I'll just catch myself, and I'll be like, it's like, if I were just thinking about it like a gardener, I'd have a better understanding.
Same.
And so that's just what I write about. And as I said, it's not, I started out writing it about every 2 weeks, but now I just write it, whenever one occurs to me. So I can, write, three a month, or one a month, but if you subscribe to it, then whenever I get one of these observations, you'll get it. I also usually pair them with, I usually pair them too with a good tip that I've learned over the years. Just something I do that's a hack. I call it a hack, a gardening hack.
Mhm.
Just something I've learned to use or do, or that's cheap and practical and gets the job done. Um, so I'll include some, and or sometimes people will send in their own tips that I'll use. So you get a reflection, and you get a little gardening tip at the same time.
I
So
love
I'm
that.
not, I never went, I was an Aggie, and my husband has always said you should have become a master gardener. I was like, I didn't have the time to do that, but I really just love it. So, and I really want, think it's become more popular now than it was even when I was growing up. And this generation loves, getting in the dirt and growing their own food and things like that. But it's just a wonderful thing to do. And you can garden if you just have a couple of pots and a front porch. You can garden. I mean,
Mhm.
you don't need to have big elaborate gardens. Sometimes sometimes in my life, I've had big elaborate gardens, and sometimes I've had just a few pots, to grow things in. But it's something that just always brings me joy. And I just something about watching things grow. Just love it.
Yeah, I love that. Now our time is almost up. Is there one last little nugget that you want to leave us with?
Oh, gee, you've gotten a lot of nuggets.
I know.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything, but I would really like people, if they are interested in this whole story. I think they will enjoy this, and I think this is something, if they buy for this Christmas, or even if they buy this Christmas for next Christmas, or and read it to their family over time, I think they would really get something out of this, and I would really love for them to let me know if they do, and if they like it. And I just think that people should think about maybe what Francis said about Christmas. And if you want to do something to kind of celebrate this 800th anniversary, I think the best thing would probably do what he always wished people would do, which is to feed the birds on Christmas Day.
Oh, I love that. That is so awesome. So, guys, I will put in the show notes where you can find the Laurel's blog, as well as where you can find her book and where you can find her. And if you do get the book, please go to Amazon and leave a review, because I
Yeah.
know authors love reviews, even there, because it puts you up higher in the Amazon algorithms. It's so crazy that that happens. But Laurel, thank you for coming on and for writing this book and for sharing the story with us.
Oh, well, this has been a great fun, Melissa. It really has been. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. And guys, like I said, I'll put everything in the show notes. Be blessed, and most importantly, keep chatting and get this book if you're really looking for a good book about the Nativity. Bye.
Bye-bye.